Hello again. Today we shall talk about fallacies. Apologies for the tardiness. But in particular, let's address a few fallacies. In all likelihood, I won't be able to handle all bad arguments, but I can handle at least a few today. So let's start off with tu quoque. Now, tu quoque is you also. It's fine as an argument if the argument is you are bad because of X. But it has a very notable problem. If you're critiquing someone and your critique is X is bad, Y is bad, Z is bad, and you say, well, you also do X, that doesn't invalidate their critique. You need to prove why X is either good or them being a hypocrite is a bad position. Essentially, a tu quoque works only when the hypocrisy is a core thing to the argument. For example, if one's being holier than thou. If one makes the argument of, I'm so good, I don't do bad things, and then points out bad things that you do, which they also have done, then the point is effective because it is appealing to hypocrisy and saying, hey, if your argument is, I am moral, and then you go against things that you define yourself as immoral, you do things that are themselves immoral, then you would be contradicting yourself, and thus your argument would be flawed. But fundamentally, a tu quoque only works in that select circumstances. Otherwise, it's completely irrelevant. For example, if I say a person from Hamas bombed a building, and someone says, well, Israel does that too. That doesn't change the negativity of that, it just expands who is counted as doing the bad thing. And you could make a very good argument in such a case of basically, yeah, they're both bad, but we're talking about these guys specifically right now. And that still functions. It is only when, one, the person involved doing the hypocrisy is involved in the first place, and two, that hypocrisy is core to breaking their argument. If their argument relies on consistency, and they are a hypocrite, then they have broken their own consistency and thus their argument. Otherwise, it is a complete waste of time. Then there is the red herring. Basically, the entire point of a red herring is the entire point of a red herring is as a distraction. Needless to say, when you try to talk to someone about a topic and they bring up something else, for example, let's say we were critiquing Donald Trump's border policy or defending it, and I say, hey, this resulted in less migrants crossing over illegally. And a person said, well, what about this tariffs? Aren't those bad too? It's a red herring, a distraction. It is not relevant to the topic at hand. Similar to a tu quoque with a you also, they often serve as distractions. Rather than actually bringing something to the table, your argument boils down to, well, there's this other bad thing, but that doesn't prove or disprove what is at hand. For example, for arguing tax policy, the current stance of said people on gays and homosexuality doesn't matter. You can have that argument later, and you can make your points all you want, but it doesn't matter to the topic at hand. I'm sorry, but some dude's stance on homosexuals does not change whether or not his tax policy is good. Distractions are not good in an argument and are, fallacious because they don't prove their point. In a discussion or an argument, there is central points, central claims that are being made and that have to be defended or rejected. Bringing out something else is irrelevant to that. And if you cannot defend your main points, well, it doesn't matter anything else that's right, because that has its time and place, and now's not that time. Put simply, a red herring is a distraction. You could simply say, it doesn't matter the current argument, focus back, and it would be just as effective as literally addressing the red herring and then making the argument. But the first is quicker and more efficient. The next one to talk about is post hoc reasoning, or, as it's properly known, post hoc ergo propter hoc. As written, it's a false cause. What's essentially going on is you say, well, this happened after this, therefore the former caused the latter. That is not how it works. For example, let's take this spoon, right? This spoon was bought, right? And then I passed a test later on. Now, would it be fair to say that buying that spoon caused me to pass a later test in one of my college classes? No, that'd be absurd. It defies any logical reasoning. But that's what a post hoc fallacy relies on, is false cause. For example, let's say taxes got cut and then a recession followed shortly after. Did the tax cuts cause the recession? Not necessarily. In fact, for most economics people, they could probably agree tax cuts generally do not cause a recession. It's other factors. And this false cause creates issues. As one might guess, one, you're blaming the wrong thing and can take the wrong action, but also, it distracts from the real root cause. For example, going back to that recession example, what if tariffs were raised, regulations increased, and a major industry did a screw-up and caused a massive failure in the economy? For example, let's say Ford decided to dump all their trucks into a pond because they didn't like the color. Absurd, yes. But it still is a thing that would cause a recession because, well, you're just wasting resources. Resources wasted, prices go up too much that people can't afford them, and then they collapse down in response because they cannot be upheld. And the problem is, if everyone's focusing on the tax cuts and trying to address that, well, then they don't solve the core problem, do they? They don't solve the tariffs or the regulations or the stupid decisions. They just attack something that is completely irrelevant to the point. And so, the false cause fallacy essentially ensures poor behavior because you're not addressing the core issues. You're looking at a situation and saying, okay, well, this happened and then this happened, so clearly the first one's the problem and needs to be adjusted for. But that's not the case in many instances. And this fallacy creates many problems with that. And so, honestly, the most efficient thing to do is to say, okay, what is the true cause? What happened before this that had direct effects that we can see in this? And that's what you should do. Another problem is the God and the gaps. Or essentially, excuses. I call it excuses, it's more than that, but the whole idea of the God and the gaps is we don't know what caused something, ergo something else. For example, if a bridge collapsed, let's say one of the bridges in Pittsburgh just collapses and people don't know why. So someone's just said, oh, the gods must have wished it, or God himself punished Pittsburgh by doing so. It's an excuse. It's not known why this happened, and the excuse is just filling in the blanks with something that is either divine or otherwise uncertain. You are looking for something to fill it in, and that's a very big problem because, well, that bridge had to have a reason behind why it fell. And if you just say, oh, God did it, or gods did it, or some other thing, who knows, maybe a fairy pooping unicorns. However absurd, the excuse is not useful because it's not actually finding the root cause. For example, do we know everything in quantum physics? No. We're constantly trying to expand that field, trying to learn. We don't have full knowledge there, and we're trying to get more complete knowledge, but there's still gaps saying, oh, the gap must be God. Doesn't help us in furthering our knowledge. It's okay sometimes to just say, we don't know at this time, or we don't know, just flat out. Excuses do not help. If anything, they make it worse and can delay actual problem solving for what's really going on. Ad hominem, or literally name calling. I'm sure we know what these are. It's the you're a socialist, you're a communist, you're an idiot, yada yada yada. Any attack that's personal rather than attacking the argument is ad hominem. It is completely irrelevant, plainly. If you're arguing on the basis of the merits of an idea, then saying this dude's an idiot, well, that doesn't change their points. They could still 100% be correct and be an idiot. I have been right on several things. Doesn't change my intelligence. I've been wrong and many more. Doesn't change that. My points stand or fall on their own merits, not on my name, not on what people associate me with. The same is true for all other arguments. Name calling does not prove anything. It is useless. And finally, I'll address one more for today. The fallacy. Or essentially, blunt dismissal. See, it's important to note that just because a fallacy is used, one of the above or maybe many others, doesn't mean necessarily that an argument is wrong. The end conclusion could still be right. For example, if someone said the sky is blue because frogs peed in a stream, that doesn't mean the sky is not blue. It just means that person made a stupid argument for why the sky is blue. And someone else could very easily go, okay, the sky is blue because this, that, and etc., and make an actually competent justification and argument. Just saying, oh, well, this person made a fallacy, therefore their entire point is wrong, a rather blunt and useless dismissal, doesn't prove your point. It just further indicates a level of foolishness on your part. I have made several arguments. Plenty have been stupid. And sometimes my point has still been right, even when I make a stupid argument. Sometimes they've been wrong, and sometimes I've changed my position. It doesn't matter whether or not my initial argument was fallacious or not. What matters is the truth of the matter, and that is independent of my stupidity or my failure in an argument. I can make plenty of points without being wrong, even if those points are fallacious. For example, if I call someone a dirty commie, and then proceed to explain why, for example, seizing control of everyone's private property is a bad idea, me calling them a dirty commie does not change my other points, nor does it change the foolishness of the idea. It just means I don't like that person and I've made a bad call. That's how things are. The reality is, a fallacy is not inherently a I win button, saying, hey, you said a fallacy, or hey, that's an ad hominem, that's a godly gas fallacy. It does not prove that you're right, just that they made a mistake. And so I can make a mistake while still being right. When doing math problems, sometimes you can get the wrong question, or rather the right answer, through the wrong work. Because you made several mistakes and luckily found the right answer. For example, let's say we're doing math and the question was 10 times 10. Make it simple. And so I said, okay, well then clearly that's 110 minus 10. Where did I get the 110 from? I thought this was 110, and the 10 is being subtracted anyways, and I get 100. Is that realistic? No. But as illogical as that reasoning is, technically, that is still the correct answer. 100 is still the result of 10 times 10. Even if I made a bad assumption and said, well, magically 10 is going to be subtracted from whatever I get, and I get the wrong answer, I can still somehow end up in the right place. It's just someone needs to correct that no, there's not just some magical 10 that gets subtracted every time you multiply by 10, and no, 10 times 10 is not 110. Doesn't matter how absurd the argument is. Sometimes an argument could be, the sky is blue because sunshine and rainbows. But that doesn't mean that the sky is not blue. Do not dismiss something just because a fallacy is used. Dismiss it because it's a bad argument. And, more accurately, the answer is bad. Because if an argument is for a bad cause, it functions as a bad argument. If someone tried to argue instead that the sky is black, well then, if that can be proven wrong, and it largely can, guess what? If they are wrong, they are wrong. It doesn't matter how much they sugarcoat things, try to stretch definitions, they are wrong. Bunnies do not fly because this and that. If they don't fly, they don't fly. It doesn't matter how many arguments you make that are good, or how many fallacies you rely on. You could use 0 fallacies, completely play it straight. Bunnies don't fly. If the argument has fallacies, that does not make the point wrong. It just makes the argument wrong. And so, vice versa, just because the point is wrong does not mean it's argued good. I should probably explain this a bit better, but the main point of it, especially with the fallacy, is that don't just bluntly dismiss an idea. Just because I have a pen and can write things does not suddenly make me intelligent. Just because a fallacy was used does not suddenly make someone dumb. A fallacy can be used, and it can be wrong. But, importantly, that does not prove the argument wrong, just proves a mistake and a bad argument. Bad arguments can be used for good ideas. Someone shouting, "The Bible says it," is still an argument against murder. It can still be used as such. It's a bad one largely because, let's face it, not everyone's a believer, but it's still an argument in favor of something that is correct. Murder is wrong. That'll be all for today. Thank you for watching.